Welcome to episode 28 of the Rooster's Crow podcast. Hope everybody is well and having a wonderful start to their 2022. This episode, I'm pleased to bring you Dr. Pete Patitsas. He is an emergency medicine physician. He is the creator of the Athos Diet, which is a platform, a book that he has, and a website as well. And he's actually the nephew to Dr. Timothy Patitsas, who is the author of the wonderful and very cherished book, The Ethics of Beauty, which I do have a playlist reading and talking about that book if you want to go ahead and search that. And we talked a lot. I really enjoyed having Dr. Pete on. We had a wide-ranging discussion that kind of started with the current situation in terms of our healthcare system, the COVID-19 situation, the response, the public health measures, the politicization of it all. We talked about the second and third order effects of the healthcare system going forward. We talked about early treatment, repurposed meds. We talked about the risk stratification of jabs. We talked about city planning and its in urban development and how important that is in terms of health. We talked about the Athos Diet and how he came up with it, and we went into his background a bit. We talked about religion. We talked about plant medicine, psilocybin, and we talked a lot about health and wellness and fasting and the importance of fasting, eating the right foods, and we dove deep into his system as well. So hope you guys enjoy it as much as I did. I really did. And without further ado, I bring to you guys Dr. Pete Patitsas. Thanks so much. Well, I just started the recording, but we'll kick it off and I'll edit it after. So
yeah. Well, it's just to say basically that I found you as a result of you doing a review of his book. And did you read the whole thing? By the way, it's a thick one.
Yeah, I did. I read the whole thing over a period of time, and then I reread a bunch of it, and I read a bunch of it for. I did some live readings on my channel, and and we're talking about the ethics of beauty, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I guess we can just get it started here. Welcome. On today with Dr. Pete Patitsas. Dr. Pete Patitsas is the creator of the Athos Diet, and he reached out, and we were able to spend some time here, or schedule some time here to spend together to talk about, this program that he has, his book. And kind of whatever else pops up. And Pete is the nephew of Dr. Timothy Patitsas. He was just telling me, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he's my uncle, and he's up at Holy Cross, busier than ever. And I know that you did a really great review of his book, and it's I think all these things are interrelated because as we talk about the ethics of beauty, I think that it was fascinating. Everyone talks about Jordan Peterson these days, and he's like a household name, at least in my my herd. But he was interviewing this guy who was the director of Braveheart, and everyone loves the movie, right?
Yeah.
And so this guy was mentioning how he believed that we were sort of in a new era where beauty was not considered sort of the highest good, or at least has been ignored. And he brought up this really cool story, which I think connects Orthodoxy and Braveheart. How would that be possible? But it happened. This guy was on another trip, and he was traveling to Russia to film another movie. And when he was there, he mentioned that their tour guide had showed them everywhere that they wanted to go. And at the end, he said, would you mind showing us something that you would like us to see, like off the tour, just something that you would want us to view and to experience here in Russia? And the lady actually took him to her church. And she said, hey, I'd like you to take a look at where I go for services, each week. And they took a look, and they really appreciated it. And he said, I'm really surprised, because I thought most people, or people of your age, because she was a younger lady, were all atheists and not really into religion. And she said, my parents were atheists. I was raised an atheist. And one day I was coming back from work, and I walked into this Orthodox church, and I saw the candlelight, and I smelled the incense, and I listened to the hymns, and I realized I had nothing beautiful in my life. And I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to post-communist bloc or the communist bloc, but truly, there was something very bizarre in their architecture, which I think emphasized that their approach to life was not one of a beauty-centered, understanding. And, I bring this full circle to the Athos diet because I think more than ever, we need to understand that our bodies are temples of our soul. And I think that we are obligated to maintain some level of health, whether you measure that as by function or by body mass or by diet and what you intake. But I think these are all very much interrelated. And that beauty first principle, I think, also speaks truly in the framework that I've set out in terms of the Athos diet.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Yeah, I did see that interview of Jordan Peterson with that director there. And, interesting to note that I think there was a, recent survey that Gen Z is the first generation that is more religious than their parents. Like things have kind of shifted, and if it have flipped, I think. And I think that, the promises of Western civilization and the secular kind of dream have crumbled before our eyes, and people are noticing and realizing, or at least intuiting that. And a big part of that is the lack of beauty that we see and we feel coming through our art and different media that we consume. So I think we're definitely at a pivot point. And I think that Doctor, your uncle's book is a powerful book. I think I don't know that he realizes how many people it's going to bring to Orthodoxy. It was a major, reading in my life that brought me back to Orthodoxy. I fell away from the church for 25 years after, being a kid and just going with yaya. And I wasn't aware of the beauty, the depth, the wisdom, the love, the culture in the Orthodox faith. And I was searching for it everywhere else, and it was right there under my nose. So before we get into it, can we get to kind of your background? Where were you born and raised, and what were your parents like?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. So I'm Dr. Pete Patitsas. I was born in Ohio, but raised in Pennsylvania, Greek American, eligible for Greek citizenship, but never went through it. I don't want to serve in the army.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, but basically was raised in Central PA, and again, I think I'm a proud mix of both understandings, paradigms of the American way and Greek way. My father is twofold. He's a ophthalmologist, an eye surgeon, and he's also a priest. So he's quite a mix of professions, and he had 5 sons. I was one of them. My mother was a stay-at-home mom, kind of like a singer on her guitar, and she had some music she used to record. And I eventually went off to medical school, perhaps to follow in the footsteps of my dad, but I didn't go into eye surgery. I went into emergency medicine, probably because growing up, whenever I would fall and break an arm, I'd ask my dad, like what's wrong with me, and he'd be like, "Why don't we go see, someone else?" I mean, he could do some basic things outside of the eye system, but I felt like I wanted to be a little bit more jack of all trades. So that puts me in the emergency department, and that's where I live right now. I've been practicing medicine for 4.5 years, and 1.5 years on my own. But in any case, it's a very crazy time to be in the healthcare system, and just to kind of again sort of emphasize that with COVID going on these last 2 years, I mean, it's crazy to think it's been 2 years. It's like a prison sentence. But I find, like many things in life, these feelings of anxiety and restlessness and depression, etc., they're really flaring across our society. And I think it's because we do wrestle with many things. We wrestle with ourselves. We finally have time to do some reflection. But what I really think is important, and this is where the Athos diet comes in, is that everyone is freaked out by COVID. And some of it's hysteria and some of it's valid, but a lot of it is hysteria and a lot of it's collateral damage, which, by the way, is wrecking our healthcare system, which is the most ironic thing in the world right now. But in any case, what can a person do to help themselves and their community during these times? And in my opinion, what that is they need to get their health in order. And so they got to get off Netflix, and they got to stop sort of thinking about when the world's going to go back to normal, and they have to stop being anxious and worried and concerned and paranoid, frankly, and do something. And that something, I think, can be something as simple as a lifestyle change, like a diet, I know exercise is a little more difficult as gyms get shut down. You can't, you don't have as much space to breathe, so to speak. But dieting, and specifically intermittent fasting, which is one of the pillars of the Athos diet, really are game changers. And if people kind of said, hey, let's just assume that we're never going back to normal, and let's just assume that I want to get back to normal for myself and for my family, what can we do to optimize our chances? I mean, that sounds really extreme, but that when you have COVID, like some of us do right now, it really is just sniffles and some nausea, and it's a 10-day course, and you're running again. And I think getting your lifestyle in order is one of those steps that we can do, that we can take the locus of control back into ourselves and say, hey, at least I can do one thing or another. And one of these things could be the Athos diet.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I couldn't agree more. So I'm in the healthcare system as well. I worked in pediatric healthcare. My wife is a ICU nurse. She's been for 10 years. My mother-in-law is an OR nurse. My sister's a labor and delivery nurse. So I'm deeply immersed in healthcare as well. And to see what's happened the last couple of years, most of it unnecessarily, is really just amazing. We're still, we're not far away from it enough to reflect on it yet. We're still kind of in the middle of it. So I'm with you there. Are you a practicing EMT? Is that what your vocation is?
Emergency medicine doctor.
Okay, you're a ED. You're a MD physician.
Yeah, I'm an attending there in Holy Spirit Hospital. Actually, it was funny because when my wife asked me, how do we know that this job, the hospital's called Holy Spirit, but how do we know that this job is, in God's hands, that this is where you should end up? And I said, Magda, my wife's name's Magda. Like, Magda, I'm going to go work for the Holy Spirit. I mean, I'm going to the right place. So yes, I work in the emergency department as one of their doctors. Yeah.
That's funny. I have, I live, how do we know we're in the right place? So I live in a town called Trinity, so it's,
okay.
It's funny how that works.
Yeah.
Let me, play a little bit of a devil's advocate here, and we've got a lot of different ways we could go. While, I agree with you that the best thing we can do is take a hold of our own personal health and take responsibility for the food we eat, for the exercise that we get, for the media that we intake. It's just as important as the food, right? But what, everybody's, you can tell someone, hey, be less anxious, watch less Netflix. What is it that determines the person's capability to actually do something like that or make that lifestyle change?
Well, I think part of it is just planting this seed that they're more in control than they realize. I mean, to some extent, it's like, I felt like, especially in the early parts of the lockdown, I don't know if you agree, but every week was kind of a wondering, will next week be the day that kids go back to school, that we can sort of get back to normal life? And a week turned into a month, turned into 2 months. And so I felt like that was then extended, even through like the administration change with sort of Trump leaving and Biden taking over, and he had a certain new policy and he wanted the 100 days and summer's coming and the vaccine is here. And so now we're into it. We're vaccinated. Frankly speaking, the most weak among us are dead or have beaten it. And lastly, we have resources within the healthcare system in theory that can deal with these issues. And all the while, numbers have never been worse in the last few weeks. So it's a very strange scenario. But what I'm basically trying to say is, this isn't going to end. Omicron variant, Delta, Zeta, it doesn't even matter. It's going to continue just like the flu is every year. And we just have to learn to cope. And when did our culture go from, that guy hasn't taken a day off in 30 years and he comes to work vomiting and nausea, no matter what happens, he's at work teaching the kids at school, or no matter what he's at work doing, whatever he does. And now it's like the culture is just so shifted. And one of the biggest problems we have in our emergency departments right now is that there's such an hysteria about being tested. We'll have 173 patients. 30% of them are just there for testing. And those are people we have to triage and get vitals for and hear the stories of. And there's some person, swimming in that ocean of panic that really has a problem. And it doesn't just have the sniffles. So, I'm not blowing off COVID. What I am saying is that there's this sort of hysteria and cultural shift where everyone now wants a test. I don't know if it's a reason to take off. I don't know if it's a reason to just wonder if they've beaten it or they want to go travel and show proof of infection. But it's making a massive toll on our ED and specifically our healthcare system here in Central PA, at least.
Yeah, my wife was telling me last week that the ED was filled with people that either took tests, they don't have symptoms, or they're looking to get tested. And I think what we see here is a result of the public health messaging that has been just atrocious. I mean, I watch the weekly update with Director Rochelle, Dr. Fauci, and that other gentleman, and what I watch it in awe. Like, what are they saying? And they keep harking on, vaccinations. They're a wonderful tool, right? For part of a broader spectrum of measures, but they've become just nothing but get vaccinated, get boosted, get vaccinated, get boosted, where it's almost comical. It's almost absurd the way that they do that. And like you were saying before, it looks like the countries where they're the most vaccinated, Israel, Canada, United States, are having the biggest resurgence in countries like, Africa and Japan, which, essentially has zero cases in a sense, right? The places where they didn't have the funds, the resources to get the vaccines, they are dealing with this pandemic better. And instead of looking at that and making some alterations, there seems to be this double down effect of doubling down, and the downstream broader effects of trust in the healthcare, public officials, trust in the healthcare system that has eroded so much is going to continue to erode. The consequences and the second and third order effects of that are profound. And I don't know I don't know that there is a way out. I don't know that there's a way that the public health industry can kind of backpedal and regain trust. I think it's really going to be this kind of atomization. And part of it is this idea of taking care of your own health, taking responsibility for you, yourself, and your family, and not assuming or presuming that what we see happening on the TV is happening, in reality. Like your local reality is way more important that you have an effect on, your local, your friends, your families, your coworkers, your local community. If we focus there and just, pour out our love and our support locally, things will get better rapidly. But we seem to be deeply intertwined with digital media, and it's assumed that is reality, like Twitter and things of that nature. It's like, that's not reality, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on the public health messaging, and why do you think it's been like this?
Yeah, you're making some great points, and it's bizarre. I mean, that's all I can describe it as. It's like the whole COVID thing is so politicized that we can't just put that aside and come up with some practical things. Like when Biden made his announcement, whatever it was, two weeks ago, talking about the 500 million tests. I mean, what he literally did is he just wiped out all the private supply and put it in the hands of the government, and it's just redundant. It's like we already have CVS and Walgreens and Rite Aid with great systems. They just need medium to make their tests, and people can't get tested now because everything's in a different distribution system that's going in some other more or less inefficient process to be brought out to the people, the end consumer. So another thing too, I can't even blame people. It's like, oh, sorry, doc, we already went to CVS and Rite Aid and everything's been sold out. And we're coming to the hospital system to get tested, which again, as I mentioned, when you're in the waiting room suffering with appendicitis for 8, 9, 10 hours, all because we have 50 people that are hysterically looking to be tested. I'm not saying they shouldn't be tested per se, but they need to be tested outside of the emergency system. They shouldn't be consuming bandwidth away from stroke victims, heart attacks, children with infections. And another thing too is, it is strange. It is so strange. Our culture, we keep making these jokes at work, but I just hope America is not invaded anytime soon. I mean, working in the emergency department, we have become so hooked on convenience and timeliness and the civilized enjoyments. I mean, it is the Titanic sinking every day that I'm at work, where you're like, there's no way someone would ask me for a ginger ale a minute after me doing CPR on a patient. You know what I mean? Like, Like our whole system is so off base. And I think, again, we just need a giant awakening, but it's a perfect storm of disaster because we mentally aren't prepared for this as a society. And I think that this is why I want to come out and say, here's something you can actually productively do and take care of. If you're a smoker, we got to get you to vaping or to sobriety, to a smoke-free landscape. If you're a drinker, let's cut down. If you're overweight, let's lose the weight. If you're eating foods that are filled with high fructose corn syrup and many different things, this is icing on the cake to some extent, but it's part of the problem. All of these things can be sort of re-examined and optimized in our own individual lives and taken care of. And then and all the while, we just need to take responsibility for whatever we decide. Whatever walk of life we take, we need to say, that's what I'm going to own today. And if that puts you in the emergency department, that's eventually, I guess you'll make your way there. But, the point though is that I do feel like what we've been getting in terms of messages and public health announcements is nothing on like how to or what to really do. And it's all just anxiety provoking and fear-based motivation to do very little. It's like, be afraid to leave or to do anything, just stay put. And I feel like it instead should be something like, hey, if you have a temperature over 101, let's call that a fever. Okay. Nothing's wrong with a fever. And at the same time, if you have, an oxygen saturation of X, because everyone has a pulse ox now, this is what to look out for. And if something's wrong with that, see your primary care doctor tomorrow. And whatever it is, we just need to come out with these public announcements and really dumb it down to our, like you said, local reality. What do I do in my zip code? And that should be leading the discussion, not like just endless Fauci, Biden, Trump, whatever it is. It's just all nonsense. It's just empty speech, So That's my monologue on that.
Yeah, and I want to double click on a few things before we get into the kind of heart of the diet and whatnot. You said that, and everybody says, right, it's become so politicized. What does that term mean to you?
Politicized, I think, means that it's almost like these weighted words. Like, I find it myself, like the moment I even say a key word, I can tell the patient I'm talking to is trying to read, if I'm judging them about getting the vaccine or not, the child getting it or not, if they're a good person or not because they're wearing a mask or not wearing a mask in certain settings. Like, there's all these judgment calls. And so it's like politicized in my mind is we're making these judgment calls based on, limited information, buzzwords, and it just completely derails a productive conversation, and communication just kind of stops. It's like whether I'm a Republican or a Democrat, and it's just bizarre. But yeah, that's what it means to me, and as a result, it's sort of a stalemate, zero progress, spinning wheels phenomenon.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I asked that because everybody says that, like, it's become so politicized. What does that mean? Because it seems like there's been this pernicious division has now spilled over from the kind of political sphere into the scientific healthcare, within everything. And there's this line of argument that this is, third, fourth generational warfare, that it's warfare based off, information and disinformation, which really kind of destroys from within. But I don't think we need to necessarily go that way. But I do have another question with regards, and this is something that, I cannot square at all, right? There are still no early treatment protocols for people that test positive. Recently, we've had the monoclonal antibodies the last year and a half, but they haven't been publicized really. It's not a media, exposure to them. It's always back to the vaccine. But we have.
And I don't know if they work either. I've given them, and honestly, I've seen probably just as many people come back days later with pneumonia than don't. But it's a new theory. It's new treatment. But yeah, please keep going. It's just wanted to mention that.
Well, there still is, if you test positive, let's say in the Delta era, right? If you test positive, the advice is stay home, and if your lips turn blue, go to the hospital. But even a novice knows that to treat a virus, you got to get it early, right? And stop that viral replication process the best you can. Yes. There are several repurposed drugs that can be used and have been used, like ivermectin, right? This drug, that's not one of those politicized words, right?
Yes.
When it gets thrown in there. And, there are, 60 or so trials, 30 plus random double-blind placebo trials. There are a lot of observational data. There's in silica, in vivo, in all these different ways that shows it is effective to some extent. And it's not going to be the same effect on every single person the same way, right? Just because there are not this big gold standard random double-blind placebo studies, which are not going to be funded because it's not, there's no money to be made there.
Sure.
Therefore, we can't say if it's effective or not, even though there's all these doctors that have used it. And I don't know if it's effective. All these doctors that have used it, there's all these trials that have used it, but you can't now get it at a pharmacy, right?
Mhm.
And I've never seen anything like that. If it didn't work, then it wouldn't matter, right? Because people wouldn't get taking it, telling each other to take it, and they go get it and it works. Like there's something going on here. So what is going on with early treatment?
Well, I mean, so many things could be said on this. First and foremost, I totally respect countries that are in the developing world who don't. I mean, this is the funniest thing, right? Tuberculosis kills just as many people as COVID every year and has been killing them for decades. We could care. I mean, like the Western powers are concerned, but passive on that. We didn't lock down the world for tuberculosis. Okay. So with that said, these developing countries are on their own to make use of whatever resources they have to deal with a pandemic that's going to affect their citizens. And I respect that. And they're doing their best to trial medications that are affordable and accessible and administratable to their people. And that's a valid effort, and that's going to take time to sort out. I've heard promising things about ivermectin. It's cheap, it's affordable, it's available. Why not use it if it works? And at the same time, I also think there's so much white noise of treatment options and things that work and misinformation. It's just there's a whole battleground of distrust out there, which I think is really, as I said, is eclipsing the productive possibilities of any of these treatment options. I know that monoclonal antibody was touted and popular for a while, and I personally, it was acceptable by the Western community and the physicians that I work with. We gave it to people. It's kind of fallen out of favor. I just don't think it was very effective. But that's an example of us in the Western world trialing something. And it's not misinformation. It's just us like trying to see if it works, And I think that there are a lot of countries out there that are doing the same thing. And it's just unfortunate that we have to, like I said, politicize it and sort of say, oh, well, this country who's just trying to take care of their citizens with the little resources that they have are doing something dishonest. It's distorting the spirit of what they're trying to achieve. And while I personally have not prescribed ivermectin, I haven't prescribed ivermectin ever in my practice, by the way. I mean, because we just don't have parasite infections, among other things. But I also will say that I'm not very intimidated by COVID-19. I mean, I've had 2 people in almost 2 years that were under the age of 30 admitted to the hospital for COVID. 2 people. Those are pretty good odds for young people. And those 2 guys were morbidly overweight, which is fine. But, just saying is that was their one risk factor. I probably have had, I don't know, a handful of people below the age of 40 over 2 years. And you start getting above 40 and then it becomes a little bit more common. But have I ever seen anyone on more than, let's say, supportive care, let's say, as in oxygen and fluids and some antibiotics, perhaps, that were below the age of 50? Probably not in 2 years in my experience. Again, I'm not trying to say it doesn't happen. Obviously, these are global patterns, et cetera. I'm just saying I wouldn't shut down a whole country for that, And the collateral damage of this whole process has just been massive. And I've said this analogy before, but if you're out on a boat in the ocean and your ship's on fire, you can put out the fire by sinking the ship. That is an option, and it's effective. But it's probably not the best option. And so I'm just emphasizing that there's a lot at stake here, and people feel it in their own unique way. And it's probably why it's such a contentious topic, because everyone's feeling it and suffering through it in their own way. It's very it's very difficult. It's a very difficult path to walk.
Yeah, and I appreciate you engaging me in this type of dialogue here, because I think it's important, and to have someone kind of with your background being able to speak on a few things. So kind of two more things in this area here when we're talking about how you seeing, you see 30, 40-year-olds, you don't see them coming in with severe disease from COVID, right? When it gets over 75 and you have multiple comorbidities, it skyrockets,
Yeah.
the severity of illness, right? So I am not anti-vax. I'm not pro-vax, right? My thing, and I have not felt or heard a satisfying answer. Like, why wouldn't they risk stratify the distribution of the vaccines towards the most vulnerable population, and then kind of go from there? Because it seems like um, they are giving a risk to people unnecessarily, right? Because we don't know the long-term effects of these platforms. Probably safe, but we don't know. It's just, we can't know it, right? So you're absolutely guaranteeing a risk to someone that might not get COVID or might not have any severe disease with COVID. Let's say a young person, a 6-year-old that's perfectly healthy, right? You're actually putting them in some sense, some sort of risk. There's a whole, the myocarditis,
Yes.
portion of it, whether it's rare or not, it's still, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And then, I've done some research and I've looked through the Pfizer studies, the clinical studies from their initial EUA, right? And the way that they did this study, right, the two cohorts, I think it was 42,000 in total, placebo and a control group, or that were inoculated. The way that they use the relative risk score of 95% effective, right? They're presenting it like, if I get that vaccine, I'm 95% affected or protected, right? But they're using the relative risk instead of the absolute risk, right? So they did in the arm that they did the shot in, right? They had a 0.25 reduction, right? So it went from 0.84 to 0.25. So the difference between 0.25 and 0.84, right, is the 90%, right? But in terms of absolute risk, like if me, a healthy 30-year-old, I'm 40 now, take that, right? The absolute risk of me not taking it is very low. And then if I do take the shot, it gets lower, right? But then there's all these other second and third order effects we can't know about. And it's hard to have this discussion because of the political aspect of it. I'm not against it. My whole family got it. I'm for it. I told my dad he's got an autoimmune thing. I'm like, you should probably get boosted too. Like, regardless, what is the deal with that? With the lack of risk stratification, which seems sensical.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of my wife coming from Poland and us getting married and her not being eligible for citizenship for like 10 years, even though she was like educated and fluent in the language and married to me. And, it's like in America, we want to be so equal that we're blind, it's crazy. And so I just think culturally, we as a society are just very bad at stratifying anything. We don't want to pretend that anyone is at greater or less risk. I mean, in a certain broad sense. But what I'm saying is we're all the same. And so we should all have access and we all have the right to it. And so it's too political but I will say though, they were offering vaccines after the first line healthcare workers, I believe, like senior citizens, but they weren't taking the next step of saying, here are the high risk people in that. We're just hoping that you show up and the people who are highest risk advocate for themselves, which doesn't always happen. And I think maybe that goes down to logistics. We don't have a national healthcare system or record. We do have EHRs, but they don't interspeak or talk. And so that's always a limitation. I do believe it was one of the Nordic countries early on in the pandemic that had all this information. And they, from what I understand, and I'm probably exaggerating a little bit, but from what I understand, they basically were able to tell people by like mail based on their health record if they were high risk. And they just said, okay, if you're an old person with risk factors, you lock inside, you do the absolute lockdown, and the rest of us are going to keep the economy and society going.
Yeah.
I think that went okay, So I don't know. It's strange. I do think we could do a lot better job. And I think part of it is that, like you mentioned, no one has the local frontline insight. I mean, gosh, man, if you could have just asked any one of my colleagues and myself 4 months ago in the end of August, what's in the water? Like, people were just showing up sick with everything. And I don't think, I mean, I have to be careful, honestly, because I get emails once a week that probably tell me spreading misinformation can cost me my license.
Mm,
And at the same time, what's misinformation is just completely up to, I don't know, whoever's at the top of the food chain to be able to say what that is. So I'm going to stop there with whatever I was about to say. But I do want to say for the record that I am pro-vaccine for those that are at risk. I actually do want to emphasize the World Health Organization does not at this point recommend the vaccine for kids and for
hmm
children. And I personally would not recommend it for my children at this point. I just don't see the need. I could
hmm
also give them, a tuberculosis vaccine, which I think was only available like in Eastern Europe. We just don't do it in the United States. Why is that? They did a risk benefit calculation.
Yeah.
And I would do the same for everything.
Yeah. And let me kind of add to that. So in any of this podcast, this discussion, there's no medical information, there's no medical advice. This is purely just talking through opinions. So don't take any medical advice from me or anybody but your doctor, probably, and none of that. So yeah, good deal. I appreciate your perspective. And now we can kind of pivot a bit more towards the Athos diet. And before we get there, I'd like to kind of introduce it this way. So something about your brother's book, when he talks about Gene Jacobs and he talks about the what we've done to cities, I think there's a deep connection to healthcare based upon urban and city planning in terms of how we build our cities, where and what we allow to be sold in terms of food, fast food. There's a gas station, there's a fast food place at every corner. They make it incredibly difficult, almost impossible for someone that's working and has a family to quickly find nutritious, good, healthy food quickly and bring it home. It's always quickly a burger or French fries or whatever it may be. So I think it gets really deep into how we configure our cities and how we configure ourselves in relation to the food that we eat physically, that I think will need to be looked at in terms of long-term solutions in terms of the healthcare. We've seen the increase in chronic conditions since 1989 really skyrocket. Cardiovascular disease, pulmonary disease, obviously,
Sure.
so I think that one of the most important thing you can do is take care of your health and take responsibility for your health. So tell us, how did you start thinking about, where did the idea of the Athos diet come from?
Yeah, I mean, so growing up Greek Orthodox, I've been fasting since I was 7 from meat and dairy, for more than half the year. And again, Western perspective is like, oh, that's so extreme. But you start to realize actually most people around the world don't have access to meat, and many of them don't have access to dairy either. So it's actually not that extraordinary. But what I will say is, growing up, the parameters for me were basically, don't eat meat and don't eat dairy. And so for half the year, I was eating a lot of really unhealthy stuff, processed foods, candy, white bread. I mean, just everything that was fasting. And what we don't realize is that as we've kind of left our natural environment, let's say our historical environment, we now have access to processed foods and to many substitute ingredients and foods that really just aren't good for us. And so I felt that although I was undergoing this disciplinary practice of restraint and discipline and avoiding certain things, that I wasn't getting much of a health benefit, or at least I didn't feel like I was. And it wasn't until getting to medical school, actually, I was charged with the task of doing like a little bit of a research project or a thesis. And so I said, hey, why don't I look for the medical benefits of fasting, which has a vast definition. I mean, there's basically 3 forms of it. You can reduce how much you eat, you can eliminate certain types of foods, and you can also only eat things during certain times. So and all the things in between and combinations. But I started to do research on fasting, and specifically was looking at fasting of monks on Mount Athos. And the reason for that was because actually a lot of professors and doctors had gone to Mount Athos to study them, because these people have been separated by geography from the Western world. Let's say generally speaking, but have been living very long lives despite all of that. And what gives? Like, how is this possible? And so they got interested in this routine. What's curious to me though is that while a lot of the research was on the Mediterranean diet, vegetables, seafood, perhaps small amounts of dairy, no meat, as we know, what they didn't highlight was when they ate. And I thought this was the ultimate game changer because I've been to Mount Athos, and I'm in a family of, my uncles are priests and professors, etc. And there was always this discussion about, fasting to get to communion, and then also about this 9th hour practice during Lent. I don't know if you ever heard of this yourself, but during Lent, a lot of non-monastics, people who aren't monastics, but monastics for sure in many places have this tradition of not eating until the 9th hour during Lent. And the idea being that God fasted until he was on the cross and he died at the 9th hour. So let's fast with him, as in let's not eat anything. And so I wondered, could this be something? And as I started to research this practice, I began to translate that into the 21st century word or phrase of intermittent fasting. I mean, basically it's what they're doing. And what I just find so fascinating about the mind, body, soul connection is you have these monks who are in essence doing something very irrational, which is like, why would you not eat throughout the day? And why would you limit yourself to certain foods? And isn't that just oppressive? And the reality is that this ironic sort of paradox results in huge health benefits. I mean, one of them is if you do intermittent fasting, and this is defined as eating calories in a confined amount of time. And all the literature that I've seen is about, you got to basically fast about 16 or more hours a day. And I can talk about the physiology behind that. But every mammalian species that does that lives 30% longer. I mean, it's just wild. Like, we live our lives here and we think to ourselves, hey, am I going to be there for my grandkids or great grandkids? Can I give them the wisdom and the knowledge and the training? Can I work beyond 64, which in my mind is a arbitrary age? How long can I be functional and lucid and live a meaningful life and a functional life? And to think that it's all within the realm of when we eat, and was being practiced by these monastics. I mean, they have like this biohack given them by God, basically. I mean, it's just like, forget your hospitals, forget your CAT scans and your MRIs. Generally speaking, fast with me to the 9th hour, and I will give you a long life. I mean, that's a powerful return on investment, and a beautiful thing, and a beautiful thing. So yes, so the Athos Diet is basically Orthodox Christian fasting par excellence, with some optimization and just some validation using 21st century medicine. And it is comprised of 3 parts. One, the most important part is this intermittent fasting piece, which I ask people not to eat any more than not to eat any more than 8 hours a day, but ideally it should be about 4. The second is to consume high amounts of protein, which is, you could say is somewhat difficult when you're a vegan, basically, but there's ways to do it. We can talk about that. And finally, and I think this was an important thing to emphasize, because everyone's like, oh, when I'm doing this transformation, I got to exercise, right? I got to do like 1,000 pull-ups and run 5 miles a day. And it's not the case at all. You just walk a half hour a day. And with these 3 prongs, these 3 pillars, that synergy is a very powerful one. I can help people lose about 10% of their body weight. And I think set them on a path or a paradigm that they can use for weight loss and longevity and functionality for the rest of their lives. And we can unpack all the physiological benefit. It is honestly like the holy grail of youth and functionality and longevity. And so that's where we are.
Yeah, well said. I like how you brought beauty into it as well, because it is beautiful. And I like the walking aspect, because, what do the monks do? They walk and pray and they tend to their garden, and whatnot. So I think it's very interesting and fascinating. And, the spiritual aspects of fasting are, I don't know if you get into that in the book in terms of, spiritual warfare, and eating feeds the passions. And if you're trying to beat an addiction, if you're trying to beat some kind of habitual pattern in your life. It doesn't have to be a physical addiction. It could be, whatever it may be, is that the ascetic practice of denying yourself food for a certain period of time, it starves the demon that is inflaming your passion. And these might sound, sensational terms. They don't have to be. We're talking in terms of the Orthodox context. Right?
Peterson is just he's such an Orthodox Christian. He just doesn't know it yet.
Exactly.
But basically, I remember him saying that just because something is fiction doesn't mean it's not true. Mm-hmm. And he was basically making this point that, we watch these films or we hear these stories and we're like, oh, well, did Jesus really scrape his knee at this specific spot on this specific date? And it's just like so missing the point, mm-hmm. but it doesn't make it untrue. And so anyway, what I wanted to mention was basically this, that, we talk about the demons and we talk about these temptations and these various energies or influences in our lives. And exactly what I'm trying to do with the Athos Diet is I try to speak to an audience that is not necessarily Orthodox, and I try to create a lingo that might relate more with people who don't have that training. Mm-hmm. And what I find it is fascinating, and I bring this up in the book for sure, is that there is a mind, there's a soul, and a body. We're supposed to love God with all of our mind, all of our soul, all of our body. It is fascinating to me that the enteric nervous system, the nervous system that innervates our heart and our intestine, is actually bigger, more complex than our brains. Mm-hmm. It's so huge.
Is that the fascial tissue, the fascia that is that what you're talking about, or no?
No, it's different. The fascia lines muscle, but mm-hmm. this enteric nervous system is they are the nerves and the neurons and all of their myelin sheaths, etc., that go from the neck down and innervate everything. It's so large, we call it the second brain. And the reason we don't have a skull for that is because it's so huge, it just couldn't fit in it. And so I always find it fascinating when people want to make a transformation for their lives. I'm depressed and I want to make a change and I want to be a better person. They always start with their diet. It's like they don't even realize how, they do realize it. They just can't articulate it. Everything starts. Maybe the center isn't, this cerebrum. Maybe it's further south, and the enteric nervous system is super complex, super sensitive. There are more cells in your intestine of bacteria than there are cells in your entire body. It is a complex market, and the cofactors and the enzymes necessary to break down food and to translate that into energy and to nutrition is just extraordinary. So what I mean to say is, being a human being, to only focus on the cerebrum, the limbic system, the pathways that are in our brain, is missing an entire universe of information and of buttons that we can press to improve our own health and our own lives. And it's just no reason why, we again, a lot of people don't start with this point that the enteric nervous system is this large or vast or impressive or complex, but they know inherently that if they want to make a change in their lives, they start with their diet, Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great way to put it. And I think that's why, as Orthodox Christians, fasting is this central part of who we are. And communion is like a meal. We're consuming something. What is that all about? Why did God give us the highest mystery that we're supposed to participate in is effectively food? What is he reaching, and why is that? And so I think that all of this kind of comes together with this sort of, with the Athos Diet sort of perspective, and sort of brings us to, sort of a beauty first understanding of why things feel right. Go with your gut. Why do you feel anxious right now? Why do you feel nauseous right now? Like, what does that mean? And and it's not like a feeling, let's say, in your brain per se. It's something further south. It's your enteric nervous system, and that's your digestion. So,
yeah, wonderful, beautifully said. And I'm fascinated by the enteric nervous system. So I don't know if you know my background. I practiced Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine for many years. I did Qigong, a lot of energy work, and they have a
Okay.
vast panoply of information and foods that you eat. And there's just a huge breadth of knowledge that the Chinese have had for thousands of years, talking about exactly this gut, the gut biome and the relationship with the brain. And the gut has neurotransmitters in it. I believe serotonin is created there,
Sure.
like,
Yeah.
so there's
All the
this
same, really.
yeah, there's this idea of, as above, so below, right? This is something that's come to me, right? So as above is your brain, out below is your intestines, right? The
Mhm.
intestines, like your brain is folded, right? Your intestines are less folded, but still this
Yes.
folding lattice work of information processing that's happening, right? We take in information via our eyes and we digest it via our neurons, right? We
Mm.
take in information via the food that we eat and we
Yeah.
digest it via the enzymes in our stomach and whatnot. And that relationship is absolutely key. And another thing that kind of came up for me is that everything lives inside of something that's living. It's like a nested Russian doll of things living in other things
Uh-huh.
at every scale, right? What do we
Yeah.
live
Yeah.
in, right? And that begs the question, and from an Orthodox perspective, like if we take in let's say we eat a banana, and that banana does not become part of our body in a sense that I have a banana hanging out of my body, right? Like
Right.
that I'm filling a sack, right? We transform that banana into our identity, right?
Mhm.
And in a real sense, we can talk about the mechanisms, how that happened. Do you think that scales up to when you eat the blood and the body of Christ, right? You become part of his body, right? We don't know how it happens. It's a mystery, right? But just like you eat food, right? You eat the dust, the gathering, the dust, you eat the food and it becomes
Yeah.
part of your identity, right? When we eat the blood and the body of Christ and giving thanks in the Eucharist, we are participating in his body through
Mhm.
this medium of being digested in a sense, but not, it says being digested by Christ and becoming part of his economy, of his body, of his energy in the world.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think all of us are trying to kind of touch on this, flirt with this powerful mystery and describe it in the way that we can. And it's it's definitely food for thought,
Yeah.
just what that means, taking divinity into you and participating in this way. I mean, we have oils, we have um, incense and various other things, but why make communion of food? Couldn't it
Mhm.
have been some other median of some sort? Even, you imagine, like, what would the 21st century communion be? If God were to come in the 21st century, would he be like zapping us with a laser or something, or running us through a CAT scan, or I don't know. But it's just interesting that he would choose that median to sort of say, hey, this is this very important ritual that you need to take part in. It ends with this consumption of something.
Mhm.
Something that's been very popular lately is psilocybin.
Mhm.
It's a mushroom, and people are using it to help those with post-traumatic stress disorder and for depression, among other things. And I've never tried that, only because I don't have a pure form of it, but there are doctors out there evidently who do prescribe the medication to people, and it's a hallucinogen of some
Mhm.
sort. The reason I bring this up is that you know people take this medication, and they basically claim that it's like one of the most impacting experiences of their lives. And I think that's really fascinating that they would say that, up there with like marriage and having a child, et cetera. And they have this universal sort of experience through the process of going about this episode of hallucination. But at the same time, I think what's so fascinating about this perspective of, here's psilocybin in a pill, you take it, let's see what happens. It's such a Western idea of experience. It's like,
Mhm.
no, in the old days, what was the ritual that surrounded the consumption of this something? And that's not just fairy tale. That's not just like teacup parties. There is something to ritual that in and of itself is very valuable and very valid. And it goes back to that whole point of, like, just because it's fiction doesn't mean it's not true. And so I feel like there's so much that, again, the diet industry in America fails so much because I think oftentimes it tries to distill things down into these pills and gets rid of the ritual, gets rid of the beauty, gets rid of the why and the philosophy, And it's kind of like, here's a pill, here's an outcome with so many people taking it. This is the relative risk. All these ways that we reduce it down into a science experiment. And we oftentimes lose the cultural impact or the lifestyle changes that occur. Cool thing about intermittent fasting, I mean, it really does show how much time we spend eating and preparing for food and cleaning up after food. I mean, if you basically confine your eating window to 4 hours a day, I mean, you suddenly just free up a massive amount of your time. And you look forward to food. You're aware of it. I often tell people I don't eat as much food as other people do, but I definitely taste more, than most people do. And so it's fascinating how I think that some of these paradigm shifts have a ritual surrounding them, in addition to sort of the specific distilled element or factor that's, you could say, driving it, but we can't always reduce it down to that. That's my point.
Yeah, well said. And I think it's such an important point that we cannot separate the sacrament from the ritual, especially when we're talking about these kind of entheogens like psilocybin or dimethyltryptamine. These were cultivated over many, many, hundreds, thousands of years by shamans that use them in rituals, right, to access certain spaces that we don't have access to anymore right now, right? And when we take them, and I've had my share of experiences in a past life of experimenting with in these types of psychedelics, and by the word psychedelic, right? When you break it down, psyche, right? Psyche is your soul, right? Delic is like generating, so it's like psychedelic is like this. You're generating the soul. I think when you're ingesting psilocybin or a psychoactive psychedelic like that, you are in some sense accessing the spiritual space that we don't have access to, right? And you're playing with an environment that is very precarious, right? And I was really heavily into it. And it was a time when I was doing a lot of meditation, and I would, the way that I've said this before, the way that I look at it now is I wouldn't touch one, it's been years and I wouldn't touch one. And I'm not saying that I've seen the Johns Hopkins studies, and I think it's amazing, but it has to be, situated within a broader context of appropriating the experience, because it could just shatter, it could shatter your default mode network, right? Where all your bad habits and everything has been kind of broken down, but what's going to fill that void, is I think question that's not asked a lot. And I think it's extremely important, when talking about stuff like that.
And at the same time, it's like, what's the context, or what's the framework? Like, it's a scary thing. I was listening to this podcast about a few of them, and many of the experiences these people have of seeing some figure, they visualize this figure who wants to speak with them. I mean, it's the coolest thing in the world. But like, imagine like talking to a monk, right, who's been doing the Jesus prayer his whole life, and he's, this would never happen, but let's say he knows you're going to do psilocybin. And in essence, what he knows is that you're going to meet like evil and good spirits, and he's going to try to build you up. He's going to try to give you the tools of the Jesus prayer and the holy unction and communion and fasting and discipline and the virtues and like the breastplate of faith. I mean, all this stuff. And then you have like the secular or scientific sort of approach, which is like, I'd like you to be in this room in sensory deprivation. I want you to just feel calm and happy. I'm there for you if you need me. It's going to last about 8 hours. And, it's just a very different, it's just a whole universe of discussion that is missed, you're never going to get from the secular world. And that we have very richly so in our Orthodox faith. And it is a powerful thing. It is a powerful thing. In emergency medicine, I see a lot of people in their end game, in their end hours. I see a lot of people who, and this is a point emphasized by Peterson, but I definitely probably have seen this more in real life than he has, or at least more extreme conditions. But you can see people, that really have it together when they have peace, when they have God at the center of themselves, and there's something really terrible going on. They're not adding to their tragedy with more of it. And then you find people who just don't have that resource, and they just make their hell even a deeper one. And that's I think, a very real phenomenon that people need to understand. They might not realize how empty they are, until that moment finally strikes. And like I said, thank God I'm on the other side of it, where I can kind of observe it in action. But there really are people who have a centeredness to them, and that usually means that they're very Christ-centered people, and they can withstand a lot, and they don't add suffering to their sorrow. When they have that.
Yeah, what beautifully said, and I can speak to that a little bit. I work with pediatric end of life kiddos that are at end of life, late stage cancer and whatnot, and I've been around a lot of them and their caregivers and their families as they were passing. And there's something very special and beautiful about the way these children that I've been around handle something like their own death. It's extremely difficult for the caregivers and for the family and everybody involved. But the effect and the impact that these little angels have on everybody around them when they're short life on this earth is something that is it's making my hair stand up here, right? And it's something
Yeah.
about they handle it with such grace and peace, right? They're not holding on, and as hard and as unbelievably difficult that would be as a parent or even a caregiver. There's something about death that we've really sterilized, and we've housed. The way that we treat death, we don't treat it, we don't look at it, we don't. It's not part of our. It's ritualistically, it's still like the funeral is the funeral or the wake. There's a lot I think that we could kind of unlock there. With regards to death and its importance, and memento mori, and in the Orthodox faith, it's important, right? Death is important, right? The life is essentially preparation for death, according to the Orthodoxy, right? We're here for a period of time to develop, our spirit, and to find repentance, and to be close to Christ when we cross that other side. And I think, just double clicking a little bit on the psychedelics again, when you're taking a psychedelic, a lot of times, especially DMT, which they call the businessman's trip. So if you smoke DMT, it's a purified form of dimethyltryptamine. Like if you take ayahuasca, DMT is the psychoactive chemical that puts you on this 8-10 hour journey. You purge and you encounter entities, some benevolent, some malevolent. If you take DMT in its purified form, you can have a cup of coffee, take a sip of the coffee, smoke the DMT, be catapulted into multiple dimensions, meet and encounter demons, elves, and a lot of the phenomenology is very similar to what we see and hear in the Bible, right? Of people experience wheels within wheels. They experience cherubim, flaming swords, in a sense. So you can take a hit of that, and in 10 minutes be back to finish your coffee. 10 minutes, be completely outside of yourself. And I don't know that atheism is possible anymore. And I think that people that are atheists or secular atheists are the ones that are having the toughest time with the coronavirus. They seem to be the most fearful in terms of dying, in terms of facing these challenges. So there's something important to that notion of having a trust in God and something bigger and higher and mysterious, bigger and higher than yourself, that helps you cope and thrive, and helps engender your well-being on the earth, while you're living. And the way that I look at it now, just to kind of put a bow on the psychedelic piece, is, so I used to encounter all the time. The last time I did it, I encountered a octopus, just this many tentacled entity that, shoved its tentacles into my throat, into my nose, into my stomach, and just started like vacuum process, just like this. I know it sounds crazy, and it is crazy, but after that, I had such a panic attack during it, where I almost, I did it in meditation room. I put the music on. I put my, meditation music. I put the incense on, right? I sent my wife to her mom's, she was pregnant with my daughter at the time. And I'm like, I'm going to do this for my mental health, just really kick me into gear. And I started doing my meditation, and then this thing happened, right? This weird thing. So I was like, oh, not doing that again. And the way that I kind of think of it now is like, we're playing with technologies we don't understand. If you give a 6-year-old an iPad that's unlocked, he's going to find wonderful dirt bike videos. He's going to find, wonderful pictures of cool video games and whatnot. But if he happens on a website, a pornographic website, right, something will come into his consciousness that he is not prepared for and cannot, you can't understand. And that can have a really detrimental effect on his consciousness moving forward. So I feel like when we're trying to play with these psychedelic and these plant medicines outside of the ritual and the context that they are, in, we are playing with knives as kids, right? We're playing with spiritual technology that we don't have access to. The Garden of Eden is cordoned off with a cherubim and a flaming sword for a reason. And if you try to go and navigate around that gate when you're not ready, you will be stricken down. Right. So that's another aspect that doesn't get talked of a lot. I love the aspect of the, heroin addicts and, severely traumatized PTSD soldiers that are, taken in this certain environment and helps their lives. I think it's a double-edged sword, just like any real profound technology, whether it's nuclear, the internet can have really
Yes.
great profound effects, but it can also have really, really detrimental effects. And, I'll take it down kind of lastly to, that is the idea of eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil prior to us being spiritually mature. Like, it's the way that I think Orthodoxy understands what happened with the fall of man, is that we were eventually to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil when we communed with God to the point when we were ready to discern good and evil, and which is, by the way, civilization building, right? You have to discern what's good and bad or good and evil to build your civilization. And we're continuously trying to build civilization with a spiritually retarded sense of good and evil. So it's like, that's why playing with, technologies or psychedelics with this, lower spiritual state that we're all in is a recipe for disaster a lot of times. But I think that Orthodox point of, we're not spiritually mature. We weren't spiritually mature enough to discern good and evil. We would have ate from the tree of life. There was another tree in the garden, right, which would have made us immortal. Then we were to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Yes.
But since we didn't take that path, right, we had our fall. We are continuously eating from that tree, always trying to get, more knowledge without the discernment to appropriately, situate that information in our lives.
Oh, it's a really fascinating conversation. It's almost as if maybe some of those medicinal psychedelics are ancient remnants, of this old geography that maybe didn't get destroyed with the transition of time. But a few things I remember you mentioning before, and there's so many things I'd like to touch point on again that you were mentioning. You were saying before, like Gen Z actually is a little bit more religious than their parents, and I'm encouraged to hear that. I will also say, though, too, that I think one of the reasons people are getting more and more political is because they don't have a religion. It's almost like, I've said this before, but in America, we have separation of church and state. Well, what happens if we don't have a church anymore? All we're left over is state. So
state becomes the church.
I see all with these Facebook groups, especially, and even intermittent fasting, because I've been sort of, in this world now as a result of the book. But people are extraordinarily zealous about their diets. I mean, almost to the point of like, it feels like they're talking about religion, but we're actually just talking about like grass-fed beef. You know what I mean? And it's sort of it's a funny thing, but I think what it does show is that, and people, we know this, but people make idols of whatever they want to make an idol of. And if they don't have God in their lives, whether they like it or not, we are built, one way or another to perceive and to participate in the spiritual world. And if we're not doing it in a rubric format, or worse yet, we don't even like think that we need to turn on that flame. You put that energy in other places that it doesn't deserve. And I've seen a very volatile sort of Facebook climate, especially about eating and all things related, which to some extent, like I'll go on there and just introduce myself as, hey, I'm Dr. Pete on the Lion Diet, Michaela Peterson's thing. And I haven't said anything more than that. And someone will write like paragraphs of information breaking down my book, describing why it doesn't fit their paradigm, get off the side, and it's just like, whoa, this is like Amish shunning to the maximum. I just said hi, but anyway, it's a strange phenomenon, and I do think it's that inherent need for people to seek God in all things, whether we like it or not. We're just oriented that way, and it's fascinating to see how people sort of start to flare in other outlets sort of poorly as a result of not having that fed in the right realm, aka our religious realm.
Yeah.
Um, so in any sense, I wanted to mention just a few things about the benefits of the Athos diet, specifically the intermittent fasting part, which is probably its most powerful prong or its powerful pillar. But people should know that the reason that intermittent fasting is so beneficial is that the fasted state, okay, and I'm going to define fasting as you're not consuming any calories for a period of time. Once you hit about 16 or 17 hours, your liver no longer has the glycogen stores that it used to have, and your muscle tissue no longer has them either. And you are now burning a new fuel, and that process, that new system is called ketosis. And you're basically burning fat for fuel. And this is important to recognize, because for whatever reason, the way our bodies are made is that once ketosis is turned on, all of these restorative processes start to turn on as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there's different parts of the nervous system which are emphasized during this period. So you've heard of these terms before with the nervous system, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. Parasympathetic being rest and digest, sympathetic being fight and flight. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you're not eating, you're not digesting, and it signals to your body you're not resting. It wants you to be on the sympathetic high, where now it's time to, find your next meal, think quickly and clearly about, strategies for success. And so as a result of doing that, you are literally turning on your nervous system in a fight and flight way, which, by the way, might actually be a really good thing if you're trying to get through an 8-hour workday or a 12-hour shift or an all-nighter. And so it's very paradoxical. And what I find to me is one of my hallmarks at work is I see a lot of patients, but I don't take, probably because I'm not eating. And I find myself with a massive amount of energy and mental clarity as a result of doing that. And it doesn't make sense, right? Because typically it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. Let's get a coffee and load it up with a whole bunch of sugar, and let's wait for lunch. Hey, and let's get some pizza for and which is all fun anyway. I mean, I'm not going to dismiss, talking about ritual, camaraderie, eating, breaking bread together. It's important. But at the same time, though, what I've recognized is that this diet allows us to sort of turn on sort of our internal energy system and really navigate our days with a little bit more strength and vitality than we're used to. What I also find then is that you sleep better. Because if you can imagine, you have this, and we know this with stroke victims and with spinal cord injuries, your sympathetic system is on just long enough that it can almost max out. Your parasympathetic then restores everything. It's almost like your neurotransmitters are being used all day long. And then they kind of like, teeter out. And then your parasympathetic nervous system, by nature of digesting and sleeping, kind of build those reserves back up. And what I find is that people who normally have insomnia get rid of it, because what they're doing is they're kind of maxing out that nervous system, that alert side, so that when it's time to sleep, finally, it's time to rest. And when they rest, it's very deep and it's restorative.
Wonderful.
One of the factors that also is something to have note is growth hormone, which popularly Hollywood movie stars take and NFL players inject. And that is all about getting them, stronger and recovering faster. Well, it turns out when you fast, you can get like it was astronomical. It was like a 5 times increase in growth hormone release when you're in a fasted state. So, again, it's like, well, why are these monastics living till 100? Well, they're probably turning on that ketosis, and they're probably turning on that growth hormone release, which is basically is what keeps people young and youthful and healthy, and their immune system is improved. Autophagy, which is another giant of a topic about getting rid of old things that no longer work and recirculating them throughout your body. It's kind of like taking down an old house and using the good parts for the next one. Your immune system improves, your insulin sensitivity improves, your lipid profile improves. I mean, there really is is a massive amount of physiological metabolic benefit to this fasting process. And again, I go back again. This is why the book, I think, is the Philosopher's Diet, is that every time I make a point about the physiology and the metabolic benefit of this practice, it all starts with virtue. It's like we don't participate in data. You know, human beings don't navigate the world through information. It's through wisdom. And it reminds me of this consulting job I did once. I had an MBA from Penn State, or I got an MBA from Penn State. One of the cases we had was when McDonald's, with the advent of the computer age, they wanted to make it so that from a single headquarter, they could monitor every aspect of every franchise throughout the world. They literally wanted to be able to say, hey, what is the temperature of the fryer in Berlin, Germany on whatever street, and monitor all of this. And they spent billions on doing it. And then they got all this information, and it was like, yay. And then nothing happened. It was a total flop. It was like this data overload, when it's not converted into knowledge and it's not super converted into wisdom, is just emptiness. And so I try to say that I think that we as human beings, again, we're wired for spirituality, we're wired for wisdom, we're wired for the good, the true, and the benevolent. And so, you know, it's almost like I think the Athos Diet tries to put virtue back into our diet. It tries to put discipline back into our diet, and it tries to ultimately help people achieve health outcomes that don't just come separated from the ritual. You know, you are getting better and healthier, but you're also learning a paradigm shift, and you're improving yourself, and you're learning discipline, and you're coming about a transformation that really is mind, soul, and body by nature of it. And it all starts, or was perfected or found, in the monastic communities. There's just no coincidence. You know, there's no coincidence that that's the resting ground for all of that.
Yeah, well said. And I think that there's a lot of parallels to the Chinese monastics who actually, you know, developed this traditional Chinese medicine and developed this way of interacting with food. And something that really drew my attention to the Chinese is when we in the West, we have this idea of we either sick or we're healthy, right? We're either well or we're diseased. They have levels above well, right? So you have sickness, you have healthy, and then there are levels that you can cultivate, right? And the practice that I did was Tai Chi Qigong, right? Qi is a term that can be translated as energy, and you're working with your internal energetic system. And a lot of that came with fasting. I mean, I lost 30 pounds. I was eating literally fruits and nuts literally for like 6 months, all these different things. And it was doing deep breathing and stimulating the vagus nerve, right? And infusing the body with oxygen, right? Oxygen is what drives the process of the chi moving around the body, right? So this kind of lucid perspective that you get in when you're fasting, this way of this having kind of this clean energy, that is the chi being cultivated in your body. And I know that sounds kind of woo-woo, but you can actually train yourself and cultivate, you know, fill your belly with the chi, right? And then it circulates through your meridians. When you go to a traditional Chinese medicine acupuncturist, they're accessing these points, these subtle points in your body that a lot of times there's stagnation, you know, and the chi is really, really interrelated with the blood. They say where the blood goes, the chi goes. So you're doing these soft movements, right? And this is why I said that you're accessing through this fascial system, the enteric system, right? You're accessing it through these movements, but you also massage the organs. A lot of it is massaging the organs, and you're actually, you know, doing a lot of different things. And then the organs, and this could maybe be for maybe a broader conversation, the organs are the seats of the emotions. So when we are working with this particular organ, right, there's so many correlations, right? The heart, right, is associated with the tongue, right? The kidneys is associated with the negative emotion of fear and the positive emotion of bravery, right? So we actually massage the kidneys, right? And the kidneys open in the ears. So you massage the ears, right? I know it sounds absurd, but you massage the ears, which are correlated with the kidneys. And in doing so, like you really rub them, or you rub your hands, right, and provide direct heat onto the kidneys, or you'll do a lot of tapping exercises where you're just tapping on your body. You'll be doing a lot of shaking exercises where you're just you're standing up in a certain stance and you're shaking your entire body, right? And you massage the organs and they move up and down. So you're actually stimulating the organs. And in doing so, you cultivate virtues, right? Because by eliminating the negative emotions, right, the heart is associated with excitement and joy, but also anxiety, right? So you want to, and you can eat foods that will, decrease the anxiety based on the heart, right? The kidneys are associated with fear, the negative emotion, and then bravery. The stomach is associated with overthinking, right? The kidney or the liver is associated with anger, right? And each organ has all these correlations: colors, times of the day, foods to eat, everything. And it kind of I'll send you some stuff there. It's really, really fascinating, and I'm very interested in learning more about the Athos diet, and because I think the proof is in the pudding here. When I would do these experiences, I would have these spiritual states that were, beautiful and insane, but I didn't have anything a container to put them in, and it ended up in a very, I quit my 6-figure job. I was with a wife and a kid, and I was gonna start this at Trinity Energy Works, where there's energy healing, teach people how to meditate and how to heal themselves through this diet, exercise, and meditation. But nobody wanted to do it. I lost, a big investment in them, hurt my marriage. I was spiritually inflated and prelest, and, it was really a really precarious point for me personally. But the energetic system that the body, is comprised of, right? The subtle body is a wonderful, beautiful thing. And there's a lot of really scientific information centered around it. But again, I think we can get into a lot of different, maybe we can get into a broader discussion down the road about this, specifically the energetic system of the body,
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, the Chinese, they're one of the most powerful countries in the world. They're a historic and ancient people. They are obviously onto something successful with their methods and ways and discussions and their descriptions of a body that, they've been also examining and investigating for millennia. So I would never.
Right now they've so that's been done away with, right? So this is a 4,000-year-old, kind of practice, and the regime that's in place now, they actually have a hospital in I forgot where, in what province there, where they just do Qi healing. You can actually, if you're a Qigong practitioner, you're cultivating constantly, right? And in a sense, you can share your well-being with others, in a sense, and you could heal others, right? And there's a lot of different things, but the current regime wants nothing to do with it, right? So this is a 4,000-year-old kind of technology, and it's based in Taoism. So I was a practicing Taoist, practicing meditator, doing this energy work for a few years. And then when I found the church fathers, and I found the orthodoxy and the saints and the lives of the saints and the information they had in the hesychastic tradition, blew my mind, because everything I was searching for and finding in pieces in Taoism and finding in Buddhism and whatnot, all these things that were interesting to me, were there in their purest form, spoken so elegantly and simply, by the fathers. And I was like, I told my wife, because I have a degree in philosophy, and, I said, all my life has prepared me to now study the Bible. She's like, what? And I'm like, I don't know what I just said either. So there's such a rich panoply of information there. And I wonder if there's more to say in the relationship between health, well-being. St. Maximus the Confessor has this idea of, have being, well-being, and then eternal well-being. These are the kind of the 3 states, right? And we are working our way towards eternal well-being, which is it's more than just not being sick, right?
Yes.
And you can cultivate these states where your well-being can be shared with others in a quite practical, physical, spiritual, sensual, healing type way, in a sense. But I think, that'll be a topic for another discussion, which I'd love to have. Yeah.
It's a fascinating universe. And I think what we're starting to discover is that, we're in the 21st century, and we've made a lot of progress in many fields of science and medicine, et cetera. But at the same time, human beings have survived millions of years, arguably, with a very different method. And just because we have cell phones doesn't mean that everything prior to it was inferior. And if these different cultures and places have different ways of describing and use virtue and wisdom as their highest currency, or their jargon to communicate, I mean, truly, you could argue that way is probably the ancient way, the more historic way. And it's like, oh, this is a 100-year experiment that we're saying is going really well right now, which is really not. I mean, we mentioned that earlier. We're kind of like so not prepared for all of the technology and the power and scale and quickness of our environment currently. And so, and for that matter, speaking to the food part, our bodies, we just can't even on a generalized public medicine sort of side of things, McDonald's and fast food is overwhelming. Like it is addictive. And in fact, it is the same pathways light up in cocaine use and heroin use as they do with eating fast food. I mean, it's wild, actually. So, again, just to say, it's like, hey, if you can fast and you can figure out a way to lose weight, you're almost preparing those same pathways. You're almost like strengthening yourself against other forms of addiction because it's the same pathway. It's the same road. The highway of addiction is just that. It's just that we can prepare and prep ourselves through the practice of fasting and food, so that we don't need to reach out for these other medications or drugs that are even more obviously life altering. But yeah, I mean, it's been great, James. I really appreciate the conversation, and it's been fascinating, actually. I think we started with COVID, and we move forward with sort of this time to get our health in order is something that we can do. But it is a universe of topics and an unfolding one. I'd love to have more discussions in the future.
Yeah. And it's funny when you reached out to me. So I'm preparing to go to a monastery in Arizona, St. Anthony's for the first time.
Yeah. One of Father of Friends. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll be staying there for four nights. And I'm going to fast. I've been trying to come up exactly what fast I should do in terms of, I'd like to take communion. And my journey is a long one. Like I haven't taken communion in 25 years. Right. And I've been preparing the last couple of years, but I've been reluctant because it's a real serious thing. Right. Like I really, I'm preparing to do it next week. Right. So I've had some guidance and whatnot.
That's
so
wonderful.
Yeah. And so it's a real kind of the spiritual aspect of it. So, I'd like to have maybe some more conversations offline, about fasting, and I'll check out your book as well, and we can have some more discussions there. But thank you for reaching out, and I really appreciate this conversation. I think a lot of people will as well, and I look forward to doing it again sometime.
Thank you, James.
Lastly, where can we find your book? Where people can find your book?
It's online, www.theathosdiet, theathosdiet.com. And, we have some podcasts on there, some media. You can buy the book on Kindle or Amazon. And there's a hard copy version too, which can be ordered. But I just wanted to echo as well, James. I really enjoyed the conversation. I found you online, and I was like, I'm listening to you speak through these topics, and I think I found an ally. So, just glad to have been another person who, is searching and investigating and testing. And I think these are all reasonable and honorable things to do. And I am very excited to hear that you'll be having communion tomorrow. And I hope you help yourself to an extra serving of Prospera and wine too.
Not tomorrow, next week. I'm going for 3-4 days. So I live in Florida. I'll be traveling there. Next week. So yeah, I'll circle back with you, and I'll put the link to your book and your information. You have a YouTube channel as well.
It's just the Athos Diet, but really everything on the website.
Good deal. Well, create more content, man. You got a lot to say. And I think we need more people like you saying it. So I encourage you to do so.
Thank you, James. Hey, God bless you and your family.
Yep. God bless. Thank you.